but जो भी है चलिए अब कितना भी हो सके we are having yet we are having 30 minutes. Okay, good. So good morning all of you. We were discussing about the hypothesis testing yesterday, and we had discussed our first test, which was single proportion Z test. Is it? So let me continue from there. Yes. That is. Yes, here it is. Yeah. So this is the process related to single proportion Z test for the large sample. When we are talking about large sample, we are concerned about the sample size. If that particular sample size is greater than 30, then that sample is known as a large sample. And single proportion test will have the Z statistic in this format: Z equals to P minus capital P divided by under root of P into Q divided by N, where small p refers, small p means the proportion related to sample. This capital P means proportion related to population. And what is capital Q? Capital Q is the value of 1 minus P. So as we know that now we guys are clear with that, while we are dealing with any of the tests, the two things are most important, that Z statistic, that means Z, that is test statistic, and that critical value. We will conclude by comparing both that, whether it is greater than, whether it is less than, and based on that, we may accept or we may reject a null hypothesis, is it? So ये सारी बातें हमको पता है, and one और एक important बात, that is about the confidence interval, is it? This is the confidence for this particular test up to 95% significance level, 99% significance level. ऐसे ही आप बना सकते हैं for the 90% significance level. We had already discussed about that yesterday. So now let me continue from that. ये पहला example we had already discussed. Second one. Let's go for the second example. What it says that in a study designed to investigate whether the certain detonator used with explosive in a coal mining met the requirement that at least 90% will ignite the explosive when charged. There's a situation related to one of the mining, coal mining. हमको पता है वो कोयले की खदान जो होती, they guys always use detonator. उसको एक्सपोज करते, इग्नाइट करते, और उसी से वो खदान में खुदाई होती, ठीक है? So what is the situation we are having? In the investigation, we are having some of the information that at least 90% will ignite explosive when it's charged. So at least 90%. This is what the data we are having, and we will set a null hypothesis based on this. Based on this, at least 90% will work properly. At least 90% of the detonator will work properly, will explode properly. It is found that 174 of 200, 174 out of 200, I can say like that also, detonator functions properly. कोई example लिया गया, that sample was having a sample size of 200, and out of that 200, 174 were working properly. 174 were working properly. जैसे उसको चार्ज किया गया, वो एक्सप्लोज एक्सप्लोज हो गए ठीक तरीके से, ठीक है? And now what we are supposed to do? That's the null hypothesis that P is equals to 0.9 against the alternative hypothesis P is less than 0.9 at 0.05 level of significance. At 0.05 level of significance, that means 5% level of significance. 0.05 means 5%. That's it. Now, observe this and the earlier question. If you can compare both that question, if you are going for comparison of example 1 and 2, then in this example, they had provided the null hypothesis. It is clearly mentioned over here. What we are supposed to check? We are supposed to check a null hypothesis is P is equals to 0.9. Now, when they are giving this particular capital capital P means the proportion of population. That means कि अगर वो जो पूरा proportion है, denominator का proportion ले रहे वो लोग, तो they are claiming that 90% will work properly. Is it? यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ at least, but it is clearly mentioned over there that we are supposed to set a null hypothesis as p is equals to 0.9, and in this question they had already provided the alternative hypothesis even that p is less than 0.9. This is what our alternative hypothesis is. We're gonna denote it as one. We're gonna denote this particular as h naught. So this is a null hypothesis. This is the alternative hypothesis. So यहाँ पे 25% काम तो हमारा आसान हो गया. We are not supposed to set a null hypothesis. We are not supposed to decide which hypothesis will work as alternative hypothesis. तो ये तो आसान है थोड़ा. Information सारी है हमारे पास. अब कैपिटल P की वैल्यू जो है वो दी हुई है, that is 0.9, and we need to decide the value of small p. Now the value of small p, that will be the proportion of good detonator. So as we know that out of 200, 174 work properly. So 174 divided by 200 will gives us the proportion of good detonator in one of the sample of 200. So using that data, we can identify a small p value. And once we are having capital P, small p, h naught, and h1, we will able to go for the single proportion test, single proportion large sample test. पता चल रहा है फिर से अगर ये example 2 इस continuation format में नहीं था, then how we can decide we need to use the single proportion sample test. तो वो कैसे decide करते हैं? We are having only single sample of 200. So dealing with the single sample test, and our sample size is 200. So it is a large sample. So यहाँ से ये decide हो रहा है कि large sample है, एक ही sample है, that means single, and we are having a data related to proportion. So single large sample proportion test will be applicable for this. Now, once we are good with that, alpha भी दिया हुआ है, देखिए alpha is 5%, that means 0.05. So इसमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं होनी चाहिए. चलिए बताता हूँ मैं आपको. Without giving any of such, I'm just giving you. Oops. एक बार देखिए solution. How many of you are able to get this? How many of you are able to get this? Let me know. I'm giving you 2 minutes. Go through this each and every statement and let me know how many of you are getting this. I will be waiting for your comment on the chat box. How many of you are good with this? कितने लोग हैं? Be honest with yourself. You're not supposed to नहीं पता चल रहा है तो हाँ नहीं बोलना है. I'm interested कि how many of you are good with this? Honestly, take your time. You may take 2 minutes. It's okay. But each and every, all 44 students will reply on the chat box. Now you are supposed to reply on the chat box almost. Smriti, are you really able to get this thing? Smriti, unmute yourself.
Yes, sir.
सच में समझ में आ रहा है सब कुछ?
हाँ सर.
क्या बात है, तू तो कोई अच्छा फैकल्टी है जो तुझे पढ़ा रहा है.
Sir?
Your faculty is quite good, I think.
Yes, sir.
Manav, Raj, Bharti, Darshan, Divya, Vaishali, Sri, then after Sushil, Kunal, Mohammed, Pema. Pema, are you serious? I'm confident about Mohammed, I'm confident about Sushil, Raj. Pema, let me know, are you properly able to get this solution? Why we are going to accept the null hypothesis over here? The similar situation was there in the previous example where that यहाँ पे देखिए why I'm concerned about that. A sample proportion is 0.87. The claim is 0.9. पता ही है हमको कि सैंपल प्रोपोर्शन है वो एग्जैक्ट एक्चुअल रिक्वायर्ड वैल्यू से कम है देखिए इट इज ऑलरेडी लेस देन 0.9 अगर 90% है तभी हम बोल रहे हैं ना कि भाई वो क्लेम तो वही है कि कम से कम 90% एक्सप्लोसिव ठीक होंगे हमने देखा सैंपल में दैट इज 0.87 येट वी आर एक्सेप्टिंग दैट null hypothesis की नहीं भाई वो क्लेम सही उसका क्यों because the level of significance here we are using 5% level of significance means what we are good with the 5% error out of 100 so that is the reason here 0.87 against the 0.9 will be accepted in the previous example कुछ ऐसा ही था 0.9 के अगेंस्ट में कुछ और फिगर मिल रही थी but we had rejected that is it so that purely depends on the level of significance कि कौन से लेवल पे हम उसको टेस्ट कर रहे हैं ठीक है good so if you guys are good with this let me go ahead this example 3 will be for you guys कल मैंने ये सारी पीपीटी आपके साथ शेयर की है देखिए आप सभी ने I had uploaded this PPT on the your login. Have you seen that? WhatsApp में नहीं भेजी ना मैंने चलिए अभी WhatsApp में भी भेज दूंगा ताकि that will be handy for you अगर शायद आपको लॉगिन में से ना मिल रही है तो मैं WhatsApp में भी उसको अपलोड कर दूंगा ठीक है चलिए but let's go for the next example next test the test of significance for the difference of proportion large samples. When I'm saying difference of proportion, that some of the things are very much clear that when we were able to get the difference of proportion, at least we will have two samples. तो क्या फर्क रहेगा इसमें और अगले टेस्ट में earlier we were dealing with the single sample population थी एक बड़ी सी उसमें से एक ही सैंपल का कुछ डेटा कुछ स्टैटिस्टिक ऑब्जर्व किया एंड वी वर कमेंटिंग ऑन दिस पॉपुलेशन Now what we are going to do, we will have two different samples with us and we will compare we will take some of the proper Z's test statistic formula and with the use of both the samples, we'll be giving comment for the population. So this is the major difference in first test and the second test. Now let me quickly go through the process related to this. Like P1 and P2 are the sample proportions in two large samples of size n1 and 2. Now, observe this is the difference. Now, instead of having a single sample, we will have two different samples with us. One of that sample is having a sample size n1, second sample is having a sample size n2, and both this will be greater than 30 because I had used the word large sample. So, values of n1 and n2 will be greater than 30. वो बड़ा सैंपल लार्ज सैंपल होंगे and the proportion related to both the samples will be denoted by P1 and P2 and from two population and okay wait one of the mismatch over there what I'm dealing with sorry that was my mistake now what we guys are dealing with this particular we are dealing with two different populations this is population P1 this is population P2 one of the sample related to first population and another sample related to the second population okay and we are comparing both these populations okay वो जो हमने बात की थी वो अगली टेस्ट में will be over there once again so this is the scenario what we are doing दो population दोनों में से एक sample mean sorry sample लिया है एक की size n1 which is greater than 30 the size of second sample is n2 which is also greater than 3 both these are the large sample by comparing both this we are going to give the comment on the both the population. So this is what we are going to do. Now, what will be the working rule for this? How we are going to deal with this? We will set a null hypothesis as per the, that will be our uh, first step. We need to set a null hypothesis that will be based on the data. Mostly that will be P1 is equals to P2. Suppose both the proportion is having same value, or we may set P1 is less than P2, or we may set P1 is greater than P2. कुछ भी हो सकता है. That will be based on the डेटा. अब ये आपको समझ में आ रहा है कि किस तरीके से हम करेंगे. जब एग्जाम्पल होगा तभी ये डिसाइड होगा कि किस तरीके से नल हाइपोथेसिस लेंगे. There is no significant difference in two population proportion. If I am assuming that P1 and P2 both are equal, then there is no significant difference in between both that population. Now, if this is my null hypothesis, then alternative hypothesis might be P1 is not equals to P2, or I may set P1 is greater than P2, or I may set P1 is less than P2. क्योंकि हमको एक बात पता है, the alternative hypothesis will be mathematical opposite to the null hypothesis. So if this is my null hypothesis, तो इन तीनों में से कोई भी एक alternative hypothesis हो सकती है. If I'm dealing with this particular, अगर if I'm setting this particular as alternative hypothesis, then I'm dealing with the two-side test. और आप बोल सकते हैं two-tailed test, two-tailed test. And if I'm dealing with one of them, then I'm dealing with the single-tailed test. Single-tailed. Instead of this, in case of this, I'm dealing with the left-tailed test. In case of this, I will be dealing with the right-tailed test. But that, once again, that thing will depend on the situation. किस तरीके का data है. Let me move ahead. Level of significance that will be provided in the equation. If it is not provided, then we will set our level of significance alpha as 5% by default. Okay. Test statistic. Now, this is important. This is what you are supposed to remember for your examination. What will be the formula for the test statistic over here? The formula for the test statistic, I'm gonna give in two different ways, in two different cases. कैसे? There are two different cases. There may be two cases. कौन से दो cases? When both the population proportion are known. If in the data we are having both the population proportion, capital P1 and capital P2, then the statistic will be given by this formula. P1 minus P2 divided by under root of this sum P1 Q1 divided by N1 plus P2 Q2 divided by N2. When we are supposed to use this particular formula, if both the population proportion is known, दोनों population के proportion आपके पास है, then you are supposed to use this formula as your test statistic Z. This is the first case. First case क्या है? If P1 and P2, capital P1 and P2 is there in the data. If it is not there, when the population proportion P1 and P2 are not known, that means unknown, but the sample proportions P1 and P2 are known. Instead of having capital P1 and capital P2, देखिए फिर से एक बार लेके जाता हूँ. देखिए what was the first case? This is our first case. If both the population proportion P1 P2 is there, then this will be a formula. Let me denote that in the next slide. So it will help you. अगर दोनों population proportion है आपके पास, तो फॉर्मूला कुछ इस तरीके से होगा. P1 minus P2 divided by under root of P1 Q1 divided by 1 plus P2 Q2 divided by N2. अब इसमें जो भी टर्म्स है वो क्या है? P1 फर्स्ट सैंपल का proportion, P2 second sample का proportion, Q1. Now what is Q1? Q1 will be 1 minus P1, Q2 will be 1 minus P2, and उसके बाद कुछ data है, that is N1, that will be the sample size of first sample, N2 the sample size of second sample. पर ये कब use करना है? When we are supposed to use this, if P1 and P2 are known, P1 and P2 are known, पता है हमको, हमारे पास है तो. But if P1 and P2 are not there, and instead of having capital P1 and capital P2, if you are having a sample proportion P1 and P2, in that case, इस केस में, सेकेंड केस में फिर दो केस है. We can find P1 and P2 इस तरीके से. by the method of substitution. सिंपली क्या करना है, फॉर द मेथड ऑफ सब्स्टिट्यूशन, यहाँ पे जो स्मॉल p1 p2 है, कैपिटल p1 p2 है, उसको रिप्लेस कर दीजिए स्मॉल p1 q1 से। देखिए ये इन दोनों को कंपेयर कीजिए, इट इज क्वाइट इजी, कुछ ज्यादा कंफ्यूज मत होइएगा, जस्ट बी विथ मी, ऑब्जर्व अबाउट दिस फॉर्मूला। कैन यू आइडेंटिफाई सम ऑफ द डिफरेंस? क्या इन दोनों में कुछ फर्क है? देखिए भारती, प्रदीप,
Yes, sir.
क्या डिफरेंस है बेटा, बता इन दोनों फॉर्मूला में। बोथ दिस, वन ऑफ द फॉर्मूला इज दिस, अदर इज दिस।
सर एक में पॉपुलेशन लिया गया है और एक में सैंपल
यस,
लिया गया है।
यहाँ पे पॉपुलेशन प्रपोजन देखिए, कैपिटल P1 कैपिटल P2, नीचे भी कैपिटल P1 Q1 कैपिटल P2 Q2, और यहाँ पे देखिए सैंपल प्रपोजन है, तो यहाँ पे कैपिटल P1 P2 है, यहाँ पे स्मॉल P1 P2, यही फर्क है। अब ये फॉर्मूला कब यूज करना है? इफ यू आर नॉट हैविंग कैपिटल P1 एंड कैपिटल P2, हमारे पास पॉपुलेशन प्रपोजन अगर नहीं है तो हम सैंपल प्रपोजन से भी काम चला सकते हैं। यू आर नॉट सपोज टू रिमेंबर दिस पर्टिकुलर नेम, कि ये जो फॉर्मूला है उसको बोलते हैं मेथड ऑफ सब्स्टिट्यूशन से निकाला हुआ है, फॉरगेट अबाउट दैट। ओके, यू आर जस्ट वरीड अबाउट दिस, कि आपको ये याद रहना चाहिए, अगर सैंपल प्रपोजन है तो ये फॉर्मूला, अगर पॉपुलेशन प्रपोजन है तो ये फॉर्मूला। पॉपुलेशन प्रपोजन जब तक हमारे पास है यही फॉर्मूला अप्लाई करना है, अगर नहीं है, पॉपुलेशन प्रपोजन नहीं दिया हुआ है और सैंपल प्रपोजन है, तो वी आर आल्सो गुड विद दिस, ये यूज करिए या तो फिर ये यूज करिए, उससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा आपके आंसर में। इज इट? वो जेड स्कोर टेस्ट स्टैटिस्टिक सेम ही आएगा, बिल्कुल सेम। एंड सेकेंड, अगर अगर वेट, द सेकेंड इज, फर्स्ट वाज द मेथड ऑफ पूलिंग, सेकेंड अब ये फॉर्मूला कुछ और तरीके से बना सकते हैं। द एस्टिमेटेड वैल्यू ऑफ टू प्रपोर्शन is obtained by pooling the sample proportion P1 and P2 in single proportion P। अब उन दोनों को एक सिंगल प्रोपोर्शन में कन्वर्ट करके भी बात हो सकती है, दैट इज P इक्वल्स टू N1 P1 प्लस N2 P2 डिवाइड बाय N1 N2। उसके लिए Z स्कोर ये होगा, एक बार कंपेयर कीजिए। आई एम गेटिंग वन ऑफ द कॉल, जस्ट गिव मी 1 मिनट, दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट। Yes, so this will be the formula we'll be using, but uh, we'll be not in need of this formula. We'll be not in need of this formula, so don't worry about that. We will be having two different cases. Either we will have the population proportion, both the population proportion, and if we are not having both the population proportion with us, surely we will have both the sample proportion. So if we are having sample proportion, then we will be using this formula. And if we are having the population proportion, then we will be using the same formula, but with the capital P1 and capital P2. Okay, but this is not the only way. We may convert this equation up to the we may convert this equation into the single sample. वो single sample के लिए we will be in need of a single proportion. So इसको capital small p एक ही sample के proportion में convert करके भी कर सकते. If we are converting that particular in the single sample, then this will be the formula we'll be using. But don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. We're not going to deal with this. If we are going to use that, I will let you know. Okay. So hopefully you had marked both this formula. ये दोनों formulas आपने mark कर दी है. फिर से एक बार यहाँ पे स्क्रीन के ऊपर दिखा दूं मैं कौन सी दो formulas हम use करेंगे. We'll be using this formula. Z equals to capital P1 minus capital P2 divided by square root of capital P1 Q1 divided by n and 1 and capital P2 Q2 divided by n2, where n1 and n2 are the sample size. Both will be the having value greater than 30, and small p, capital P1 capital P2 both are the proportion related to both different samples. If you are having both the proportions with us, then we'll be using this. Instead of having both the population proportion, we are having sample proportion small p1 and p2, then we will be using this formula. So note it down, both this formula, we'll be using any of them according to the situation. Okay, let me move further. Critical value that we will stack on the basis of question, and once we are having that test statistic value and critical value, we're going to compare both that, and if it is less than, then we surely going to accept the null hypothesis, and if it is greater than, then surely we will reject the null hypothesis. So similar kind of process will be there. ये सारी बात हम कर चुके हैं. Yes, one more thing we would like to add over here, that is the formula related to the confidence interval. As we discussed in the previous test, वहां पे जो कोई एक फॉर्मूला थी, किसकी फॉर्मूला थी याद कीजिए आप. कॉन्फिडेंस इंटरवल की कॉन्फिडेंस लिमिट की इज वो फॉर्मूला और ये फॉर्मूला अगर आप कंपेयर करें, देन ऑब्जर्व this particular term and this term. As I said that in the product of that critical value, will be always using its denominator. वो फॉर्मूला का डिनोमिनेटर यूज करेंगे. देखिए कंपेयर कीजिए इसको, इसका डिनोमिनेटर क्या है, p1 q1 divided by n1 plus p2 q2 divided by n2, based on which of the data we are having. That's it. So this particular term, the denominator will be there in the product of critical value when we are going for the formula related to the confidence interval. So the confidence interval formula will be P1, P2, small P1, P2, that means proportion related to sample, plus or minus 1.96. Now this 1.96 based on the 95% confidence interval. वो 95% के लिए कर रहे हैं तो उसकी क्रिटिकल वैल्यू यहाँ पे आएगी टू टेल टेस्ट की. 99 के कर ले 99% के लिए कर रहे हैं तो वो वैल्यू आएगी 2.58. अगर if we are dealing with the 90%, so that will be 1.645, something like that, is it? So by that way, we may go for the confidence interval based on this particular test. Is it? Are we good with this? Are we good with this? I don't think so. We will be able to go for the examples in this session. But first of all, let me know, are we good with this? समझ में आ रही है सभी को बात? How many of you are getting this? How many of you are getting this? Good. कोई बड़ी बात नहीं है. इस चैप्टर का इस पूरे दो जो लास्ट जो पूरा यूनिट है ना, यूनिट 4-5, उसका जो बेस था ना, दैट वाज सैम्पलिंग. उसके जो सारे टर्म्स जो है वो सारे एक बार दिमाग में घुसा देना. वंस वी आर गुड विथ ऑल दैट बेसिक स्टफ कि क्या है भाई ये सिग्निफिकेंस लेवल, how we can set the null hypothesis, how we can set the alternative hypothesis, how to find the critical value, how to identify the critical value, and what is a test statistic. ये सारी बातें अगर दिमाग में हैं, and how to choose a test from the data. डेटा है हमारे पास, उसमें से टेस्ट कैसे डिसाइड करना है. इफ यू गाइस आर गुड विद दिस, तो ये यूनिट खत्म ही हो गया आपके लिए, तो ये सिलेबस ही खत्म हो चुका. क्योंकि अब जो मैं डिस्कस कर रहे हैं हम लोग, वो डिफरेंट डिफरेंट टेस्ट है जिसमें प्रोसेस बिल्कुल सेम है. हर बार हम चेंज कर रहे हैं क्या, दैट इज जस्ट द टेस्ट स्टैटिस्टिक, दैट्स ऑल, नथिंग एल्स, इज इट. एंड फॉर्मूला रिलेटेड टू द कॉन्फिडेंस इंटरवल, वही चेंज करे. And as I said that you are supposed to remember for each and every test. So if you are good up to this, then surely कोई ज्यादा काम बाकी नहीं है. ठीक है. But we will move on the example from the next session. Let me stop the recording over here.